Somebody yell at me. Give me a neural adaptation that increases force production after resistance training. Somebody give me one. Something, anything. Literally read off the slide.
Voluntary activation is great and stronger.
Yes, okay. Voluntary activation, so we get an increase in motor unit recruitment, okay? The primary thing that drives neural adaptations and increases in strength is you become better at recruiting or turning on whatever muscle you actually have, okay? And that is why people that are very untrained tend to not be as strong as people that are trained. This is the big driver, okay? So what you guys see here, these are just an example. These are some data from an experimental study. This is in the quadricep, okay? I didn't put the number, but this is 12 weeks of training. The dark bar is what we call voluntary activation, or the percentage of motor unit recruitment that you're able to do when you began. They were at about 82%, okay? So these people on average could use 82% of the muscle in their quads before they trained. After 12 weeks of training, and this is knee extension training, one leg, knee extension like so, the other leg was their control. They had bumped that up from about 82 up to about 90%. Okay, up to about 90%. That increase translates partially into an increase in force production. Okay, you will note in their control leg, right? Basically no difference that's going on. Okay. So one of the largest, if not the largest driver of neural adaptations is just you can better recruit. Okay, you can better recruit. Your muscle hasn't gotten bigger, you're just better at using whatever it is that you've got. Okay. And I apologize, these are kind of complicated looking graphs, but I'll try to walk you guys through. But the big picture, okay, is that not only does motor unit recruitment change and increase, but it tends to be very, very task specific. Okay. So if I ask all of you to come in and do 10 squats every day at the start of class, your changes in motor unit recruitment are going to be very specific to doing 10 squats, just like how I did it. Okay. And this manifests in some interesting ways that I think you guys will find applicable if you're interested in training athletes or yourself or rehabilitating people. Okay. So let me show you this. We will start here on the left. Okay. And what this is, these are very, very old data, almost as old as me, okay, showing the effects of doing training at different velocities. So training fast versus training slow, okay? So what you can see here is this is training at torque production, training at 96 degrees per second. So about 90 degrees per second, right? That may seem pretty fast to you if you think about, like, I'm doing a squat and that's like a 1 second down or maybe about a 2 second down on squat versus training at 240 degrees per second. Very, very fast. Okay. They then tested these people. So what you see on the y-axis is torque, okay, strength, and then the x-axis is testing people at different velocities. So if I see how strong are you before and after training when I ask you to go very slow versus when I ask you to go and contract very fast. Okay. So this is done on a Kincom device like we all have in our labs. If you guys take exercise physiology lab with Andrea, Dr. Ferreira, you guys will do testing right at these different velocities. Okay. But it's a very slow contraction. So you'll note the units are radians per second. Radians degrees are 2 pi radians, so it's kind of the same thing. The smaller the number is slower. So slow contraction like this, maximum strength during a slow contraction versus a very, very fast contraction. Okay. And you'll note these graphs look just like our concentric force velocity graph. As you go faster, overall force falls. Okay. But you will note when I train slowly, I get a greater increase in strength here when I test at slow velocities, and a little bit less so fast. When I train really fast, I do not get faster going slow, and I do get faster when I go fast. I look at these two graphs and say, well, why are we training fast again? Right? Because some people will argue with this, is that if you're an athlete, or even to walk around and do things, you need to be able to contract your muscles quickly. Right? We want power. There's some ways to train all of this, but you know, this seems to work pretty well in comparison. When you train really, really fast, you do not gain stuff here because the neural adaptations are very, very specific to the task. Okay, that's sort of the point to take home here. What you can see here, this is from 1986. This is the same sort of data that we saw in the histograms a few slides ago. This is, right, you're doing, say, bicep curls, and we're testing over the course of 12 weeks, how much the weight you were using doing, say, your 3 sets of 8, your training weight, how much did it go up versus how much did isometric strength go up? So isometric strength is going up, but it's only going up. You'll know how kind of crazy the y-axis is for units. It's going up 15 or 20%. And yet the amount of weight you're using when you're actually lifting and training has gone up like 160%. Okay. And you think like, gosh, that's crazy. But yeah, you went from curling 10 pounds to curling 22 pounds or something like that. Like it's not that sort of crazy to think about that we can increase our training. Okay. And so this is submaximal contraction, dynamic contractions, much larger increases during that specific task compared to something else. Specificity of training is unbelievably key when we talk about nervous system adaptations. Okay, you are going to get better at doing exactly whatever it is that you practice. Whatever it is you do when you train, that's what you get better at that speed through that range of motion. Okay, and some of that is transferable to something else, but not as much, but not all of it. Okay, not all of it. Okay. Another neural adaptation, okay, if I continue to have a screechy voice, is we get a decrease in antagonist recruitment. Okay. So these are particularly famous, kind of really, really insightful data that were published in 1992. And so what you can see here is over the course of 8 weeks of training, this is what is happening, okay, to force production or strength in the knee extensors. And then on the bottom, it's showing what's called an electromyogram. You guys who took human physiology here, you guys remember doing an electromyogram? I was actually explaining this. Ellis was on a big kick because she saw me grading y'all's papers. That she wanted me to teach her about science this weekend. She's like, Daddy, teach me about your science. Can I come to the lab? Can you test me like you test other people? She's super cute. But I was showing her a video of what we do with EMG. Which basically, right, we put stickers or electrodes on you, we have you do a contraction, and it measures sort of the volume of the action potentials in the peripheral axons and along the sarcolemma level. So a bigger EMG signal means more nervous system input into that muscle. Okay. And so here is knee extensors, here's hamstring EMG. And you will note that hamstring EMG falls within the first week of doing things, and then it kind of fades out over the course of time. The reason this is important is so I get better at using the knee extensor, so I get more force from the knee extensor to push out. But by having less co-activation, what we call when they contract at the same time, less hamstring co-activation, my quads have to overcome, doing a knee extension, overcome gravity and the weight of my lower leg, whatever weight I have that I'm trying to lift, plus they have to overcome the force that my hamstrings generate trying to keep this from going up. So when my hamstring is not as active, there's less antagonist force that I also have to overcome. And so that's going to be the thing. It's very strange to me. Oh, those are teams things. Like, what on earth is going on? Okay. So to summarize, okay. Neural adaptations, we increase motor unit recruitment, we decrease sort of activation at some submaximal loads, you're more efficient. They're very specific to training and testing velocity and contraction type. We get decreased antagonists here, and we get increased descending neural drive. Which I did not show you guys any data. But one of the other things that happens as you train more is you get less interneuron inhibition applied to in the spinal cord to your alpha motor neurons, so it's easier for them to actually polarize. This is partially what drives how we get this. Okay? Partially how we get it. Okay. Questions about all of that? No? Anybody do anything new on Friday? Go work out, do any kind of new things on Thursday or Friday or Saturday?
Did cable extension, so like tricep push ups, I put my elbow on top of the
Okay.
machine. I would do it
Be
like-
better today, Joe. Right? Neural adaptation. You will be better at doing that if it's new and unique today than you were just the other day. I hadn't done any sort of weights in a long time, and a couple of weeks ago, and I went to do some tricep kickbacks. And basically thought like I had ripped my tricep in half. From a cramping perspective, which was pretty great. Do you guys ever go and you're watching people in a very non-creepy way? Sometimes you'll see people trying to do tricep kickbacks and they're basically just they're like their upper arm is like this and they're just dropping the weight. Right? They're like, ooh, this is great. I'm like, no, you got to get over and you got to get them up. You're just essentially dropping the weight. I don't know why that occurred to me right now. But there we go. Okay. Now let's talk about the thing that most of y'all probably are really, really interested in. And that is hypertrophy. How do we get you bigger muscles? Okay. How do we get you bigger muscles? The book calls it this. Other people will call it this. It's called contractile protein adaptation. If we have more contractile proteins, if there's more actin and myosin in a sarcomere, the sarcomere gets bigger. If the sarcomere gets bigger, the myofibril gets bigger. If the myofibril gets bigger, the fiber gets bigger, right? So on and so forth. And eventually then we notice that at the whole muscle level. All right. Ay. Okay. Let me just turn. So let's talk about how this changes in the time course of this change. And this is a problem for exercise adherence. It takes, under normal circumstances, I'm taking steroids, okay? It takes probably 6 to 8 weeks to see sort of visual, noticeable, measurable increases in muscle size. That's a long time, right? If I told you guys you can start working out now, okay, and maybe by Halloween, but probably more like by Thanksgiving, you will notice that your muscles are actually bigger, okay? It's a long time for people to have to continue doing things, okay? And we will get into why it takes that long in a few slides, why that process is slow in a little bit, okay? So, other questions that we want to make sure we understand. How big can you get? Okay. If we were to go, it's Monday. If we went to Steel, anybody work out at Steel? Okay. Crunch? Some of y'all? No? I just assume the rest of y'all don't work out at all. Like, this is interesting. Usually I'm like, yes, Steel. One of my grad students used to work the front desk at Steel, and she can tell some stories on all of that. But if we only ask a layperson, how big can your muscles get? Right? They're gonna be like, I don't know, I'm gonna get real big. Right? Really, really big. And the answer in actual practice is you really can't get that much bigger. Okay. We assume there is a limit. Without steroids, there's a pretty safe assumption that all of us have some genetically determined limit on how much bigger our muscles can get. It likely is going to be in the range of about 5% to maybe 40 or 50%. Okay. Some of that's based upon how big, how trained are you now, but the vast majority of it is genetic. Okay. The vast majority is genetic. There's almost no data on this, almost none. Okay. Because can you imagine we're going to have to follow people and test people for years and years and years to try to get at this. In animal studies, when we look at animals with shorter life cycles, mice, rats, cats, dogs, okay. Yes, we do research on dogs, it's terrible. And those kinds of things, they fall relatively in this same kind of a thing. Okay. So what I will tell you guys, let's see, Joe, is that when you see other people and you see people that look like they are really, really, really big, okay, the most likely explanation is they're taking steroids. It's very, very common. It's very, very prevalent. So then when you see them, they're like, dude, I do 12 sets of 2, and that's how my arms are so big, and I do curls. No, it's steroids, right? It's the Winstrol that makes you big, not that you're doing 12 sets of 2. Okay, there's not some real magic in, like, everything works. And I'll share a little bit. There's only been a couple of studies on people taking anabolic steroids. It is unethical for us to give people anabolic steroids, like in a randomized control trial, and actually test them, right? Because there are known can be pretty bad side effects. So I can't just give you, right? I can't just give you steroids, right? So some of what we know from men and women taking hormone replacement therapy and doing things and kind of looking at what happens when they don't have it to when it goes back to physiological levels. But we know if I give every one of you in here a testosterone supplement, you can sit on the couch and eat flaming hot Cheetos and you will get big. Probably bigger than everybody else in here who doesn't take them and works out. You don't have to work out and you take steroids and you're going to get big. If you take steroids and you resistance train on top of it, we're unsure how big you're going to get, but it's going to be really fucking big. Okay? Really big. Okay? And so when you see things, sometimes you guys know the saying, you've heard something called Occam's razor, right? Which is the idea that the simplest explanation is probably the most likely explanation. If you see someone who looks really big, especially really big and very lean, right? I'm not talking about like you're big and you are like, I'm 6'7" and I weigh 350 pounds and I'm just big, right? To be big, you got to have a lot of muscle to carry all that weight around. But I'm talking big and very lean. They're all on steroids. Hates it, but they're mostly they're all on steroids. Okay. Joe, you had a question, and then Colin, did you have a question or no? Okay. Joe.
So if somebody were to go just say they do one cycle and they just hop off of it,
Uh-huh.
does that cycle revert back to like what they normally look like, or they kind of just break past it?
How long are you doing? Like, what do you mean when you say a cycle?
So one cycle is typically like what, 8 weeks?
I don't know.
But so they do one cycle. You those effects.
You take it for 8 weeks. When you stop taking it, will you go back down to normal? It will not be immediate because there's always, as we will see, there's a little bit of a, you're working out, you've been working out for a month. Where you are now, you're getting the benefits of all of that, and that's going to extend out for a little while. But yeah, I mean, once you stop, it's going to go back down. And if you stop and you stop lifting, yeah, you're going to go back to normal. And in some ways, it may even be worse because You take anabolic steroids and it, right, you guys remember from human phys, remember feedback loops, right? Hormones are driven by negative feedback or positive feedback, in product inhibition, these things. Your testosterone goes up. You take it injectably under your tongue or however you're taking it. You shut down endogenous production of testosterone. That's why you do all of this right. You take it, and then when you cycle off, you have to take female fertility drugs basically to try to ramp natural production back up again. And so that's one of the things that people, when they actually do drug testing, that they're testing for is they're testing for sort of the ratios, testosterone to epitestosterone. They're testing for chorionic gonadotropin and these things that are going to be like if you're taking a fertility drug to try to ramp your endogenous production back up to kind of get it restarted. You take them long enough, you stop making your own testosterone. So you will go back to normal, but you know the question is when and you know. Okay. Other questions? All right. So let's dig in a little bit deeper on some of these things. You may ask yourself, Dr. Black, how do we know, right? 5 to 40%. Well, here is data again from our largest resistance training study. This is just in the bicep, okay? Just in the bicep. Here we have sort of some people worked out for 12 weeks and got smaller. Sorry, you have bad genes. Or they really went on a diet over that kind of time. But even if you do that, you ought to still be able to get an increase. Some people, about like 5-8% of each men and women, didn't get any bigger. Right? All that work, all those things, not going to get bigger muscles. I'm sorry, blame your parents. Okay. Here is sort of the histogram of all of this. The vast majority of people are between about 10 and 25% increase in muscle size. There are some super responders out here, 50-55% in the midst of all of this. Okay. That's what we're looking at. On average, men got 20% bigger, women got 18% bigger. So an average person can increase their muscles about 20%. So let's do fun with math. Okay. Fun with math. Anybody want to share with us how much you weigh? 60. Okay. Joy weighs 160. Any idea what your body composition is? What your percent body fat is? 16. Okay, great. This is perfect. Okay. 16% body fat. Just on an off chance. Joey, if we gave you how much bigger do we think you can make your muscles? Like how much weight, like how much more might you weigh non-steroids if we went out and we did this? Do you think you can weigh 180, 185, 190? No? Not 190?
I know there's a 212 division for guys like my size.
Okay. But for the rest of you guys, if you said somebody weighs 160 pounds, right? And you said you think you could add 30 pounds of muscle with proper training, right? Over time. A lot of people would be like, that seems reasonable. I could totally do that, right? Completely wrong. If we made every muscle in Joey's body, every muscle, 15% bigger, okay, and kept his body composition the same, he would gain 8 pounds. Okay, maybe more like 9 or 10. I've done the calculation on a 150-pound person. Okay, but 15% bigger, that's 8 pounds. If every muscle in your body gets 15% bigger, and they're not, okay, you're not going to train all of them. So people's ability, and we're not even talking about if you did that and you actually lost some body fat or something in the midst of all of that, then that number may shrink a little bit. Most people are not going to get that big because you're not gaining 18 or 20% of your body weight, right? You're gaining 18 or 20% of sort of your muscle mass that is part of what is going on in that body weight, okay? So when I say, I'm sorry, most of y'all aren't going to get that big. If anybody, you ever hear, right? Women sometimes will say, I don't want to have great big muscles. I don't want to look mannish or whatever. I don't know, right? Everybody gets to make their own decisions. You're not going to get that big, ladies. The guys aren't going to get that big, right? And so people that gain with resistance training, if they're gaining 30, 35 or 40 pounds, we see that sometimes in 17, 18-year-old individuals because they're still just maturing in their growth curve kind of thing, right? But also, they're not just gaining muscle, they're gaining body fat and other sorts of things that are going to kind of accompany all of that in the mix there. Okay? Oh, you had a question?
Studies, like, have them track like protein intake and stuff like that?
I don't think they tracked protein intake in this particular study. My guess is that they ask all, I would have to go back, that they ask all of them not to change their diet over the course of the study. Okay. I will say another thing. We're going to talk about protein synthesis in a minute. I'll just say this now. I usually save it for a bro science thing. Okay. Show of hands. How many people have taken some sort of amino acid or protein supplement? I'll put my hand up because I have. Okay. How many of you that have taken it are vegetarians? Okay. Then for the most part, very, very likely that you guys, just like me when I have done it, had all you did was have expensive urine. Again. Okay. If you eat a normal American diet, the vast majority of us get pretty close to an adequate amount of amino acid and protein in our diet. It's okay to take the supplement. It's not going to hurt anything. But for most of us, it's going to have little to no beneficial effect. Okay. If it has an effect, it might actually be on sort of recovery in between today and tomorrow and the next day. But it's very, very, very unlikely that it's having a very profound effect. If it has any effect, it's maybe an extra % or 2. You were at 18 and now you're going to get 20, right? Something like that. Now, if you don't get enough protein in your diet, it becomes absolutely key. If you are, say, a woman who's going through menopause or postmenopause, if you're a guy, as I'm screaming toward that age, who is soon to be going through andropause and those things, or you're a very older adult like my dad and those things, right? Then the math changes a little bit. But in y'all, it's probably 5. Okay? It's probably 5. Not that big of a thing. I'm sorry to tell everyone, supplements are shit, right? It's a multi hundreds of billion-dollar industry. And basically caffeine works. Protein's good if you're not getting enough, right? And you might make the decision that it's cheaper to buy protein powder than to go and buy hamburger and steak and chicken and those kinds of things. And that's fine, right? It doesn't hurt anything, but pretty much almost everything, it doesn't work. It doesn't actually work, right? I don't care what you saw on TikTok, right? I don't care what the bro at the gym told you. It works for the bro at the gym because he's taking steroids and those things. Okay. All right. Questions about that? No? Okay, but we will talk about why people think taking protein is important. How do you get bigger muscles? Well, you get bigger muscles by a process called anabolism. Okay, anabolism. Net protein anabolism. So making more proteins, taking amino acids, and specifically making more actin and myosin and muscle-specific things. Okay, but you have to be in sort of what we call net positive protein balance, net protein synthesis over some minimal period of time. Probably 3, 4, 5 weeks, okay? And we can use diet, we can use protein supplementation to tip those things a little bit, but we really need resistance training to primarily drive a lot of these things, okay? Protein synthesis or protein anabolism is very complex. And it integrates a whole bunch of different signals that eventually lead to making myofibrillar or making actin and myosin and other muscle-specific proteins. Okay? A lot of the reason that people think that taking a protein supplement is the greatest thing in the world comes from the research that we've done looking at sort of an acute response. I did a bout of resistance training, I took a protein supplement, and then we measure what having that supplement versus not having it does to my measured protein synthesis rates after one bout of exercise. And we see this ginormous response, okay, and we'll talk about that, okay? But the problem is that what we see after one bout, no matter how many times we do it, we get this giant increase after one bout. 150% increase in protein synthesis after one bout of exercise if we properly time your protein supplement afterwards and we properly match it like it's in chocolate milk with a little bit of carbohydrate and all of this, okay? 150% increase in synthesis rates, right? And yet, over the course of 8 or 12 weeks, you don't get 150% bigger muscles. You get 10% or 12%. Okay. When you take the supplement and you compare that over 12 weeks to somebody who doesn't take the supplement, you get 1-2% bigger muscles. You don't, this acute response that all of the supplement companies advertise on does not actually translate into the same kind of markedly greater increases at the end of 8 or 12 or 16 or however many weeks of training. And that's why we have to be careful with all of this, okay? One bout of training tends to lead to a positive net protein balance where synthesis, okay, tends to predominate over degradation. A weird thing happens when you do resistance training. Protein synthesis goes up, protein degradation also goes up. You damage some fibers, sometimes that's why you're sore. You damage muscle fibers after you've done a bout of resistance training. So degradation goes up because we got to repair. But what happens is we want to tip these two things in the scale where synthesis tends to predominate a little bit. Okay. We will get into on Wednesday what are these cellular signals that thing can turn on if somebody drives on. Okay. Test back on Wednesday if you want them. Yes, ma'am.
Ask you to make yourself test for her, because you won't be back to Dallas till later.